Hi, everyone. Welcome to this new live podcast of Anywhere Uni. And we have tonight our first university guest. We have the honor to be with the University of Edinburgh. Ali tonight is with us. So Ali has been working for the University of Edinburgh for 6 years. She's American and British. And she covers different regions of the world in terms of international recruitment. She's the manager for North America, Africa, and the Middle East. Hi, Ali. Thank you for being with us tonight.
Thanks for having me. My pleasure.
Nice. It's a pleasure to have you. University of Edinburgh is always a university that we receive lots of questions. Students are very, very keen. Scotland is a very exciting place to study. So we are excited to learn more together tonight. So I'm going to start with my first question. We're going to dive right in. Why is Scotland such a special place for prospective international students?
Great question. So Scotland, I think, is a really unique destination to live in and to study in. And Scotland is also home to a really large number of world-class universities. So in fact, I think in Scotland, there are more universities per head of population than any other country in the world, wow. Which is really a testament to kind of the culture of history, of innovation, of teaching, of learning, of research that kind of has always taken place and existed here in Scotland. So I think it doesn't really matter where you're based in Scotland, whether it's at a university that's like in a rural campus or in one of the major cities like Edinburgh. We have lots to offer students coming from all over the world.
And so sometimes for students, it's a bit confusing because they're looking at the UK as a kind of one country, but it's 4 different countries, and Scotland is definitely one that's different. So how is it different for a student that would be, it's the same, it's the UCAS application, it's the same application for any university in the United Kingdom. So why is Scotland different, and how is Scottish universities are different from English universities, for example?
Yeah, so great question, a question that we get asked, all the time. So as you rightly said, there are 4 countries in the UK. So there's England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland. And Scotland definitely is a unique and distinctive destination. Not only is kind of the warmth of the Scottish culture and the people that live here like a true testament, which makes students who study here have a much better experience, I think, in my opinion, but also kind of the education structure in Scotland is different to the rest of the UK. So from kind of a political or government perspective, Scotland does have its own government, which oversees a lot of aspects of kind of daily life for those who live in Scotland, and in particular, education and healthcare are kind of 2 areas of responsibility that are overseen here in Scotland. And so for that reason, you'll find a slightly different education system in Scotland compared to the rest of the UK. And that's really evident in our undergraduate degree programs here in Scotland, which are 4 years in duration, unlike the rest of the UK, which have degrees that are 3 years in duration.
And I know the names also confuse students quite a bit because they're looking for their regular Bachelor of Arts, the BA, which is the 3-year, usually 3-year undergraduate program. And what do they find when they look at Scottish universities?
Yep, another great point and a great question. So in Scotland, at some of our ancient universities of Edinburgh, of which Edinburgh is one of them, we do have a unique kind of degree classification system. And we tend to call all first degrees awarded within the arts, humanities, and social sciences subjects a Master of Arts. So for students who are looking to do their first degree in a subject like history or literature or politics, they would be working toward an MA or a Master of Arts in that discipline, but only at kind of those ancient universities in Scotland. So at Edinburgh, at Glasgow, at St Andrews, at Aberdeen, and then also at universities like Oxford and Cambridge. The modern universities are kind of the institutions that aren't quite as old as the University of Edinburgh will have kind of the more typical naming system or classification system working toward those bachelor degrees. However, it is still a bachelor's degree.
It's still a bachelor degree, right? Students are not getting the deal of the year.
Exactly. I mean, it will say on their graduation certificate that it is a master's. Some employers may infer that it's, a step above what it is, but ultimately, yes, it is an undergraduate qualification. But it's just one of those kind of cool, unique kind of differences that you might get studying at an institution like Edinburgh.
And so why is it 4 years? Is there a difference in the approach, in the way the curriculum is delivered, in the term of major, minors in Scotland?
Yeah, so good question. So Scottish degree programs are designed intentionally to kind of include those 4 years of study. And we want to give students kind of a broader and a more flexible approach to higher education. So with the fourth year, students can try a range of subjects before they specialize. So if a student doesn't know exactly what they want to major or kind of study, they can try a few different subjects and then perhaps change their major or kind of really determine that major into their first and their second year. So by allowing students to take classes not only within one subject area, this sort of breadth of knowledge is really prized by employers from what we hear, and it allows students again to try maybe new subjects that they're interested in without having to commit to studying them throughout their full degree. And so importantly, it can also help students to maybe identify where their strengths lie and perhaps, again, where they may want to specialize in if they're just not entirely sure. So it can really help to support that kind of broad skills development over time. So what we would say is that our degrees offer breadth of study in their kind of first 2 years and then depth of study in the latter 2 years. And so this allows students to have that really kind of broad-based and flexible approach to their degree.
Yeah, which is great to have in the UK, because in most other places, there are a few universities in England that have flexible combined honors and more flexible programs, but they're kind of more of something that's a bit rare outside. So it's great to have Scotland that offers this option. And so just to clarify a bit further for students, could they combine anything? Like and how does it work when they choose on UCAS? Like, is it something that happens when they get to the university? Can they choose before? Are there only a few combinations that are possible? Like, how does it work?
Yes. Okay. So great question. So definitely when you're applying through UCAS to any UK university, students will be selecting a major or a subject area. So in the UK, we tend to call these not a major and a minor. We would call this a single honours degree or a joint honours degree. So a single honours degree would be where you're studying one subject. That might be history, okay? If you're doing a joint honours degree, you might be studying something like history and politics. So in your first year in a Scottish institution, if you're studying something like history, that single honours degree, you would be able to take kind of 2 outside courses or 2 elective subjects during your first and your second year. And you would choose these on arrival. You wouldn't input this into your UCAS application. You could make that decision when you arrive. And if you're doing a joint honours degree, you would have maybe one elective or kind of one choice that you can make in terms of extra subjects. And you can choose those when you arrive again, as I said, and you can do a different one in your second year than you did your first year, or you can continue on if you really found, you're a history student and you took literature and you said, hey, I really want to study history and literature now going forward, and you can change your major. Or perhaps you were a history student and you took, an elective class in economics and thought, hey, actually, I'm really fond of economics. I want to kind of continue down this path. You could hopefully change your major to economics. So we would definitely support kind of those changes that are within similar subject areas, within similar subject disciplines. What we probably couldn't support is kind of what we would say a radical change. So something like business to biology, that would be a bit more difficult, but things within kind of those related areas are certainly possible, especially if you're going from a single honours to a joint or a joint honours to a single.
Okay. Yeah, because students usually in the UK, they're very careful about, what high level do I need, or what, in the French back, what specialties do I need to take? If it's a degree that requires math or math and the science. So I'm assuming that you're going to look at that as well. And students will kind of have to look at within the subject they're most interested in, maybe the ones that have these kind of requirements compared to some that wouldn't have these kind of requirements.
Yeah, so I think when you're selecting these elective courses or kind of your, the ones outside of your major, there are kind of 3 caveats to consider. The first is that you can really take any subject as long as it doesn't clash with your core subject. So again, if I was a history student and my kind of core history class was at this time and I wanted to take philosophy, it couldn't be at the same time, right? It would have to complement my schedule. The second would be, the second caveat is that you'd have to have any prerequisites that were required. So for example, if there was a science required in high school or a language component, you would have to have already done that. And then the third caveat is just that there's actually space or capacity on that in that class. But so essentially, you could do most things.
Technically, you could, yeah. And so, would you say that are there some specific subjects where it's better to get in right away because the competition is so high, and maybe they're the most popular subjects, and you would say for these subjects it's maybe better to try to get it right away because it's hard to transfer in there. I'm thinking, popular subjects right now are computer science, this kind of thing, economics. Is there something to consider, or?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, anything popular, is going to be competitive or selective and will be kind of at capacity. So absolutely, if you're extremely passionate about a subject, perhaps you should be applying directly to that subject and not trying to kind of just take it as an elective course. But yes, I mean, there are, with some of our larger lectures, with an economics lecture, you may be able to get lucky, but it would depend on your timetable as well. And again, whether there's any capacity on the course. But you're absolutely right. Those really selective and popular classes are trickier to find a space in.
It's good to know, because sometimes students think, because of that flexibility, I can be a bit strategic and maybe apply for something that's a bit less popular, so maybe that's going to increase my chances of getting an offer, but then might not be the right solution.
Yes, exactly. We would encourage students probably not to try to game the system, but to go with what they're passionate and motivated and suitable to study. And if they are interested again in a different subject that's without their major or out with their major, they certainly can take that, and we would do our best to support it.
Okay. And when you look at, because UCAS is a centralized system, when you look at personal statements that maybe are written for English universities that are single subjects, do you consider the personal statement in a different light, knowing that, these students might have universities outside of Scotland in their list? Or do you even look at personal statements? Like, what would be your take on that? Because some students are worried that, at the University of Edinburgh, I have 2 subjects, all the other ones, only one. How can I do?
Yeah, so this can be tricky, I guess, for students. And I think, kind of the technical answer, what I'm supposed to say is that students should be applying and referencing every degree in their personal statement. So if they're applying to, let's say, history and politics at Edinburgh, but history at 4 other universities, they really need to be demonstrating kind of for us, kind of equal motivation and suitability for both subjects. And this is especially important for subjects like PPE, where there are 3 subjects, and we want to see kind of that demonstrated interest across all 3, and not just in politics and economics, but philosophy too. So for students who, again, where those subjects don't always kind of equally match up, and this can happen, it's worth reaching out to me or someone at Edinburgh or another one of their choices to see if they would be allowed to submit an additional statement. This can sometimes happen, but not always. But generally, I would just suggest doing their best to kind of explain their passion for the subjects and referencing, if it's something like history and politics, both subjects as best they can. And actually, for a university like Edinburgh, the personal statement can be a really important part of that kind of admissions decision. I think while academic suitability and kind of meeting and exceeding our kind of academic entry criteria is kind of by far the most important component. When we get into situations what we would call a tie break, or where, we have 1 space left and 10 students, all with 3 A stars, or with a 43 in the IB, or with an 18 in the French bac, really equal, candidates on that academic level, that's when we will really want to start to pull out who the student kind of is and what they would bring to the classroom. And this is where that personal statement can really help us to identify the strengths, the experience that student has, and kind of, see what they would be like in the classroom and how they would maybe complement the rest of that cohort. So it can be really important. It won't ever make up for academic grades, but it can certainly boost in a tie-break situation. And unfortunately, I've also seen it kind of lead to unsuccessful applications as well, where maybe it wasn't entirely clear what subject they were applying for. So the clearer that statement can be, the better, because it is
The
really
better. Yeah.
important for admissions, especially in those competitive situations where there are 1,000 applications for 100 spaces, to make sure that the student really wants to be on that program.
Yeah, and I mean that's what I always tell my students is, even if some universities in the UK might tell you, actually we don't read personal statements, because that exists. Some universities don't look at it. You will always have in your list of 5 at least 1, and probably 2, 3, maybe 4 or 5 situations where they're going to read it. So it's very important to craft that personal statement with care and with everything you know, to do your best there, because as you said, in a tiebreak situation, that might make a difference. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I think, as you say, like it might not be read by half of their choices, but it might be read by the others. So you would just want to make sure, and it's a really good exercise, I think, as well, to make sure students are, you know, applying for the right program. If they can't craft a statement for a subject area, perhaps they need to keep doing their research.
Exactly. That's how we use it.
Good
All
to
right, great.
hear.
Thank you. Okay, so let's go back to the University of Edinburgh and the experience there. So how is the University of Edinburgh different from maybe other Scottish universities, from other universities in the UK? How is it a unique institution?
Okay, yeah. Well, Edinburgh is very unique, certainly. So Edinburgh, let's see, we are the 6th oldest university in the UK, and I think we're the oldest civic institution in the English-speaking world. I'm pretty sure that's also an accolade that we have. So we're really old. We were founded in 1583, and this means that we've been teaching and educating and conducting research for, you know, almost 450 years. Yeah, for a while. And this means that we've had a rich history. We've had tons of alumni and distinguished scholars, you know, everything from Nobel Peace Prize laureates to Olympic champions to space explorers to prime ministers. And Edinburgh really has been influencing the world, as we say, for hundreds of years. But despite our history, we are currently a modern and progressive institution with cutting edge research, with inspirational teaching and innovative kind of thinking really driving everything that we do. So we offer hundreds of subject areas, I think around 700 different options for students. And students who do choose Edinburgh are really looking to kind of experience the best in teaching and research. They want to experience that kind of flexibility in their academic study that we touched on. They want to experience kind of our world-class services and our facilities, and they want to undertake their degree in a really cool, unique location, which Edinburgh is. So we are a really small kind of community here. I think the population of Edinburgh is, I don't know, 500,000, and most of those are students. Certainly about one in 10 residents here are studying, even if not at Edinburgh, at another institution in the city. Mm-hmm. So they really want to take advantage of that kind of vibrancy. Edinburgh is a large university, though. We are the largest in Scotland. I think we have, just under 50,000 students here. So that's we're massive. Right up there with the University of Manchester. Yeah. So a big place to study, but lots of different degrees. We're kind of spread out over the city. The city of Edinburgh really is, I guess, our campus. We're not just a campus out in the middle of nowhere. We really use the city to our advantage, and that allows students to, you know, put a lot of the stuff that they're learning in the classroom into practice.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a bit biased because I love Edinburgh. I think it's the best city in the UK, in my personal opinion. I think it really balances both worlds, because sometimes students are like, oh, I want to be in a city, but at the same time, you know, being in a massive city like London, some students thrive in it and some students struggle because they don't really have a university campus. They might have their housing being very far away from like a half an hour metro subway ride to the university. And they might not have that feeling of, okay, I'm part of a community, we're together. And as an international student, that can be a bit difficult in these big cities. And I feel like Edinburgh, as you said, such a big university in a smaller, but still quite big city. You kind of find both, I would think.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we like to say that Edinburgh is a wee city that feels much bigger. So in Scotland, wee means small. So we're a small city. We're an intimate setting, but it feels much bigger. It's got all of kind of the amenities that you would expect a European capital city to have. No, we're not quite technically in Europe, but you know what I mean. We've got, you know, world-class universities, shopping, pubs, restaurants, sporting facilities, tourist attractions, museums, outdoor space, everything that students really could have to study. And again, it's in a really intimate setting. So students are generally walking to class. Everything's fairly close by, or they're taking, a short bus ride. And students really do say that they feel at home quite quickly when they move to Edinburgh.
Yeah, so I'm assuming social life at the University of Edinburgh is good.
Yes, I don't want to speak on behalf of the students, but from what I hear, it's a really great place again to study and to live. And our students have, found a really good balance of striving in academia, but also enjoying some of their downtime. So, I think a fun fact about Edinburgh is that 50% of the city is kind of green space or outdoor park space. And our students do take advantage of this, whether it's, sitting in the park reading or kind of running or doing sports. And they really do kind of maximize their time when they're not studying. And because Edinburgh is a university city as well, you'll find lots of kind of options for students across the city, and maybe not just Edinburgh University students, but students from some of the other universities and colleges, always, pub nights or quiz nights or whatever students do, or student nights, and lots of things on offer for them to do. Plus, we're really well connected. Students can kind of get out about in Scotland, or they can easily connect down to London or other places in Europe fairly easily too.
Yeah,
so they're able to take advantage of lots.
Yeah. The airport is quite well connected to the rest of Europe, so that's also a plus.
Exactly. So we're an hour flight to London, a 2-hour flight to Paris, and lots of other destinations as well.
Yeah. And so you just mentioned academic life. University of Edinburgh being as prestigious as it is, what's the typical workload for students? Are they just working all the time? Is it really a lot of academic pressure? Like, what's the feedback you get from your students, and what do you, when you recruit students, are you looking for these kind of profiles? Like, what is it like?
Yeah, great question. So, academics it is tough. I think any transition for any student going from high school to kind of university level study is an adjustment. At Edinburgh, our degrees are kind of designed to encourage a lot of independent inquiry, critical thinking, and robust reasoning skills. And so we really champion independent learning, and we facilitate student support and peer-assisted learning opportunities as well. So by this, I mean, we're supporting students to kind of study in their own time a lot. And I think this is one of those kind of major adjustments from high school, where you're perhaps in a classroom most of the day, 9 o'clock to 3 o'clock. Then you transition to university, where you might only have, 10 to 15 hours of what we call contact time per week. So that's contact time would be time in a classroom or in a lab or a studio, depending on your program. However, we would encourage our students that they should be studying 40 hours per week. So that means they have a lot of time that is dedicated to
that's a full-time job.
Yeah, exactly. And a lot of that time is independently led by them. So whether that's, conducting background reading, talking in peer groups about the topic of the week, writing essays, putting together reports, etc. There's a lot of work that they kind of have to lead themselves. And so for this reason, we are looking for students that have that kind of high level of kind of independence and motivation. A lot of students who are taking, rigorous qualifications like the IB or the French baccalaureate, these students are familiar with this type of rigor and that kind of type of learning. So they tend to perform kind of really well, I think, at Edinburgh and at Scottish universities. But in the classroom, I guess, for undergraduate programs, we have a mix, I think, of approaches. So in our early years, students are maybe likely to find themselves in large group lecture theaters, maybe some smaller size tutorials where you kind of discuss and analyze a problem or a topic. And of course, then we'll have studio or lab-based assessments again, depending on their major. And then in the later years, the classes get a bit smaller, especially in those tutorial groups. And then toward the final year, you'll have a bit more group work, probably field work, depending on your degree, and your kind of honors dissertation there at the end.
Yeah, I mean, it is an adjustment. I know for students that come from, I guess, high school backgrounds where they might have 30, 35 or more hours of contact hours in class hours a week, and they get to the UK and it's 12, 13, 14 hours a week. And that's, I know when I talk to students after they get there, it's always a bit of a shock.
Yes, exactly. And this is the hardest adjustment. And I think that it's probably the case for most kind of high school to university transitions. But this is why we try to talk about it as much as we can before, just so that they're aware. And, I think, Edinburgh is a social university. It allows for a bit more of that camaraderie. You don't have to study in your room. You can go to the library or to a cafe or a coffee shop and hopefully get a bit more support that way. So hopefully that kind of drives or motivates students. But it is important that students know that, they're not going to have a teacher checking their attendance, from 9 to 3 every day. That a lot of times, they need to review that syllabus, make sure that they're keeping up with what's required and expected, so that they're not, caught off guard, right, when that first exam or essay is due.
Yeah, I think it's such a key factor in their success is that to prepare for that transition, to realize that everything is there. There's lots of other international students and students they can make friends with. But if they're expecting to be given these friendship groups on a platter, it's not going to happen because, as you said, there is some larger lectures where sometimes it's not as easy to connect because people come in and out. You don't have that many contact hours a week. So that's where the students that do the best are the ones that are going to try to join clubs, to join sports, to join different activities on the campus. So they don't have only these 12, 14 hours of contact hours, and maybe half of these are in larger group, and they have all these other opportunities to connect and to make friends, which is, I think, is one of the main factors for success, is for students to find their people, to connect with other students.
Yeah, totally agree. And I think it's also important for students to know that we have like a full range of like support services, whether that's for kind of academic support or kind of health and well-being or welfare support. So all of these are available, but students will have to kind of independently seek them out. They're not necessarily just going to kind of flag themselves to the student. So this is a really important, I think, consideration for students who are looking to study, not just at Edinburgh, but kind of overseas in general, that they need to really kind of be mindful of kind of seeking out what they need and making sure that they're identifying their peer groups, their friend groups. They are trying to join those clubs to meet students as well outside of their subject area.
All right. And so let's move now the conversation into these international students that might come from any part of the world, and maybe they've never been to Scotland, maybe they've never been to Edinburgh. So let's discuss accommodations first. How does that work at the University of Edinburgh? I know in the US, for example, some universities will say we guarantee housing for the first year. Is it the case at the University of Edinburgh or not? And if it's not the case, how can students make sure that they secure that student accommodation when they get here?
Yes, great question. So we do guarantee accommodation for all first-year students coming from outside of the UK. So the ways that students can guarantee that is to apply before the deadline. So apply on time, not late, not the day after, but on time. And that deadline is typically around July. Before they start their degree. So they have plenty of time. Typical offer making time is around March, April each year. So they would have until kind of July to submit that accommodation offer. So for undergraduate students, we have kind of one main kind of facility or kind of area where students stay. And this is our catered accommodation facility. I think it can house up to 2,000 students. It's the most popular choice because it includes a meal plan, which would be breakfast and dinner every day. But we do offer quite a range of accommodation all across the city of Edinburgh. And students can select based on what preferences they have or where they might want to stay. So they can choose not to have the meal plan. They can choose their own room or a shared room. They can choose to share a bathroom or to not share a bathroom. They can have an ensuite, etc. So depending on what their preferences are, they would include this in their accommodation application. But I would say probably the most common accommodation setup we have is called flat style. So there would be maybe 4 or 5 bedrooms that share those kind of communal facilities, kitchen and living space, and maybe 2 bathrooms. And that's what we would call a flat style or apartment style living, and with a meal plan where they would have breakfast and dinner included. So that tends to be the most popular, but we do have, again, a range of choices depending on a student's individual preferences, whether they want family accommodation as well. So they would just need to indicate this in their form.
All right. Yeah. I always recommend students to go for the student housing because this is usually where you
Absolutely.
make friendships for life. And even if, some students might not be comfortable in the idea of sharing all these spaces, but I mean, I think it's really worth the little pain that it can be in order to connect and make friends.
I definitely agree. And we would always encourage students to do that as well. It's the best way to find your feet, to kind of realize that everyone's arriving again from outside of Edinburgh for the most part. So everyone's in the same sort of position. And then I would say that most of our students will tend to move into what we would say called the private sector after first year. But we do reserve a few spaces for students who want to continue on in our accommodation. But because Edinburgh is so kind of interconnected with the city of Edinburgh, oftentimes they can find a lot of private accommodation, again, within an easy kind of walking distance to the university. And they prefer to have that little bit of autonomy, freedom, and to live with their friends. But
great. And so what's the international student population like at the University of Edinburgh? What's the percentage of international students and where are they coming from?
Great question. Okay, off the top of my head, so we've got about 49,000 students overall. There are about 180 nationalities represented in that. I would say...
It's okay if the stats are not exact. It's
about
just an estimate.
half of them are coming from out of the UK.
Wow.
So our probably largest population group is coming from China and then followed by the United States. And then after that, so we're quite unique in that regard, I think, in having the US be a really significant population at our campus. And that has been, or at our institution, and that has been just a long-standing history with the US of welcoming students from the US, again, for like 400 years. I think Edinburgh has like quite a number of like signers of the Declaration of Independence who have studied with us, or kind of past presidents as well. So a really popular choice for the US, and then a range of other nationalities as well. I think our top two kind of nationalities probably coming from the EU would be from France and Germany. And yes, again, students coming from all over.
All right, great. And so how do you welcome these international students? Can you walk us through the first 2-3 weeks of these students that would, show up with their bag in August? They have their accommodation secured. They know they have their place, the university secured. Yeah. What would be the process? Like how is that transition?
Yes, good question. So we do support our students really from application and offer all the way through to arrival in August. So even before they arrive in August, there will be lots of touch points where they can meet with me and my colleagues who travel internationally. I know we're hosting, I think, some offer holder events in Paris in a few months, I don't know exactly when, where they can kind of meet other people and kind of prepare for that transition to university. They can learn about the city, what to pack, what to wear, how to apply for their visa, what to do when they arrive. And then once they arrive, we have kind of an induction or a pre-arrival team that will kind of facilitate a week's worth of events. And we call this week Welcome Week. It's the week before classes officially start in the UK, and there are tons of events for students. Not all of them are kind of limited to international students. A lot of them are for all new students to the university, but there certainly are events that are just for international students. Some of these include kind of like orientation events, so quizzes, not quizzes, scavenger hunts around the city so they can kind of get their bearings, understand where the grocery stores are, where there might be like a halal food shop, where the religious centers are, where everything that they need to know is located. And there's also a lot of subject-specific activities happening at this time. So depending which kind of school or faculty the student is joining will kind of really determine what events they're doing. But I think the other really important kind of welcoming bit is there's always a big welcome by our principal and by our kind of student ambassador teams, which help students with what we call kind of their top 6 tasks, which they need to do to really facilitate kind of that transition to living here in Edinburgh as a resident. So these things are like, get a SIM card, register at the doctor, really practical tasks that you just sometimes don't know where to start, right, when you come to a new city. So we have a full team on hand to help students do that. There's events for parents as well. So if students are arriving with their families, their parents can learn a little bit more about the university, about some of our alumni. And there's, just a lot of events. I think there'll be visa checks and just lots of things students can do to really feel welcome. There'll also be social activities. So everything, all of our sports and societies will be holding like new or welcome events for new members. They'll maybe be offering some of their activities for free, so students can try them out for the first few weeks to see if they want to join them. Right, so a busy week, lots happening.
All right, great. And so I'm just going to jump quickly because I'm thinking about it now, about when they graduate. I know in the UK, I know it changes all the time. Immigration rules change all the time. But at the moment, I think students get a 2-year visa where they can stay in the country to work. Is it the same in Scotland?
Yes, that is the same. It's 2 years for undergraduate students, and I think it's 3 years for master's graduates just now. Yes, big caveat to that immigration changes. So when I said kind of way back earlier in the beginning of the chat that kind of Scotland has its own government, that's true. One of the things that the Scotland government does not oversee is immigration and border control. So that is a kind of a UK responsibility. So we will have the kind of the same immigration rules and regulations as the rest of the country. So the same as England, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
Is it the same if you're an EU student or if you're an outside of EU? Is there any difference in terms of the rules for if you have an EU passport or not?
Yeah, so in terms of the rules, I think anyone coming from outside of the UK, so that would be the EU or any other country, would fall into that category of what we would classify as overseas or international. If they require a visa to study in the UK, they would be eligible for that kind of graduate route visa at the end of their degree. Yeah.
All right, perfect. And so let's talk a bit about tuition, because university is not free usually. Even in France, where it used to be free, it's becoming more and more expensive. How does it work? Is there different categories? It used to be 3 different categories. We had like Scottish students with EU students. Now EU students are not there anymore. We had like in England, like UK-based students that were not Scottish, and then international students. Do you still have these different categories?
Yep, so you're absolutely right. We have 3 categories in Scotland, and they are home, which is essentially Scottish domiciled students. The second category is our UK, so that's our friends in the rest of the UK, so that's England, Wales, and Northern Ireland. And then third is overseas, which now, as you say, includes our friends in the EU. And so, yes, applications to our programs are assessed within kind of this fee category or this kind of applicant pool. So applicants who, they're assigned a fee status at the point of application. And if they want to kind of query this, they can do, and they'd be asked to submit, further evidence and documentation for our fees team to consider. So this might be, links to the UK, previous residency, family ties, or a reason a student, has moved, etc. This could be lots of different things. So there is still a bit of gray area between the fee categories, but those are the 3 that we're currently working with, and students will be, I suppose, competing within their fee category. So
within their pool, yeah.
So like a student coming from the EU isn't competing against a Scottish student. And the reason for this, and this is really boring kind of chat, but just so everyone's aware, is that the reason we have kind of this Scottish pool of students, or the Scottish category, is that in Scotland, the government actually pays for Scotland students to go to university for free. And the government actually tells each university how many Scottish students we have to take every year. So we have a quota. And so every year when we get this quota, we then say, okay, right, the Scottish government is saying you have to take, 1,000 students. And we're like, okay, we can take 1,500 students overall because that's how many spaces we have in our classroom. And then the 500 additional spaces will go to the remaining fee pools. But the challenge can sometimes be that the Scottish government changes every year how many students they want us to take. And there are really strict penalties for over or under recruiting, financial penalties. And so the university must get that right. And, I think it's worth noting too that the Scottish government is aware of a lot of the programs that, let's say, are popular across the world, and sometimes ups its number of Scottish students they want to study a program like PPE, for example. And this really does kind of change how many spaces we have for students coming from other countries, and it could vary year on year. So a really delicate balance that we're working with, and this is why I think in particular Scotland universities might take a little bit longer to process applications. We tend to get this Scottish government allocation in January every year, although it was a bit later this year. And sometimes, if we're being cautious, we may not make a lot of offers before that, just so we know exactly the number of spaces that we're working with.
Yeah, so for our international students that sometimes have lived in many different places, might have a British passport, but have never lived there, or lived in the UK, but now are just moved elsewhere, they have to be aware that when they receive an offer, it is based on a specific pool of applicants, and that if they wanted to be reconsidered to be in a different fee status category, you would have to kind of reassess their application within that different pool, so they could potentially lose that offer. Am I correct?
Yes, that is a very good point. And I will add to that as well to say that at Edinburgh, we are quite strict with the UCAS equal consideration deadline, and we would want to see every fee status query before then. So for example, if we had a student applied who was assigned an overseas fee status for economics, and he didn't query that until after the equal consideration deadline, we would not be obliged to consider, and then was subsequently assessed as a Scottish student, we would not be obliged to consider that application, because we will likely have already closed our applications for economics after that deadline.
That's good to know.
So lots of things to consider. So the earlier a student wants to,
apply
but as
early.
you said, apply early and get your documents
early.
in early. Yeah. And again, get those documents in early, because we had a lot of fee status queries come in post UCAS equal consideration deadline, but that fee category had already closed for the most part. So it's really tricky to shift those numbers around at that stage.
Can you before receiving an offer, can you ask for that fee status questionnaire, or is it the university that decides, that student, we have different kind of information on different location and we need more clarity, so we're going to send a fee status questionnaire? Like, is it something students can ask, or should they just wait? And if they're asked, they ask, and if they're not, they wait for the offer, and then they can query that before the January deadline?
I would, yeah. So you can query it. You can submit the fee status questionnaire post application. So not before an application is submitted, but I would recommend doing it before the offer. So if they submit their application in, I don't know, November, and it's kind of clear that they'll be stated, or they'll be classified as overseas, but they have ties to the UK, a UK passport, etc. Worth getting that done, and it should come back pretty quickly, and that allows that application to kind of be set into the right pool. And I know this sounds really complicated and boring, but it is super important, because there are so many students who question their fee status, rightfully so. But it can make it really difficult and even more competitive. And as you say, they may be eligible for an offer in one, but not the other. And if you're classified as one and not the other, you can't go back either.
Yeah. And
so lots to consider.
So would you say, I know it changes from year to year, because as you said, the government changes the quotas every year. So you might have a very different number of applicants from year to year based on interest and popularity of the programs, based on the number of slots you have in each category. But would you say that as an international student, it's usually easier, harder? Is there any kind of rule where? Yeah,
it really depends. It depends on the subject area, for sure. What can be really helpful is that we detail our admission statistics on our website, and we separate them by fee category. So you can see in the Scottish pool who's applied for every single subject area, how many offers were made, and how many enrolled. You can see that for the RUK students and for the overseas, including EU now as well. So you can see that within each pool. So you can see really clearly which subjects get the most applications, and kind of gauge that level of competition. But you'll know too that some subjects are popular one year, but not the next. So it's really tricky to advise based on historic data. So this is just a guide really to kind of show previous levels of competition, but things change. I would say one thing at Edinburgh last year, history was really, really competitive and popular. And this year doesn't seem to be as popular for students. Don't know why. I mean, still pretty selective here, but overall, and this is a trend, that we're seeing across the UK, so not just Scotland, but this is common in many countries too. I'm sure there'll be kind of ebbs and flows of popular subject areas, but it makes these kind of advising situations a bit tricky.
Yeah. So, and in the UK, you have that unique system that most students now are familiar with, where you have entry requirements on the website saying, for this course you need this type of grades. If you're doing this type of curriculum for an IB, we would look at this kind of higher level grades like 666 or 766, etc. in the French bac. So I feel like, correct me if I'm wrong, in Scotland you need quite high predicted grades for popular universities like Edinburgh, and especially the most popular subjects, I'm sure. But then when the conditional offers arrive, students are sometimes surprised that the offer is much lower than what they're at. And I always tell them, it doesn't mean that the University of Edinburgh or another Scottish university is easy access for anyone with that kind of grades. To get that offer, you needed these top grades, but the conditional offers for some reason are a bit lower, maybe, or?
Yeah, that is very true, what you've said. It's very complicated. I think you're right. So the UK is unique in that we're selecting and I suppose, admitting students based on grade predictions. But we're using it, I suppose, as a selection criteria. But typically, we're doing that kind of based on response to the pool of applicants. So as you say, if our website says for history, we're looking for an IB score of 40, but we get 100 applications and they all have an IB score of 44 predicted, we might issue only those predicted of 44, which I know is super, super high, impossibly high. We might issue those students the offer, but conditional on them achieving the 40, which was what was published. And I know this can be confusing because perhaps someone who is predicted a 40 didn't get the offer. And I don't really have a good answer for this as to why it happens, but the reason admissions officers and teams do this is based on yield percentages, on how many offers they make versus how many will actually enroll. And as I said earlier, especially with our Scottish students, we are fined if we over-recruit or under-recruit. We have strict financial penalties, has knock-on effects across the rest of the university if we over or under-recruit. And because we don't really know what students are going to get in their grades, ultimately, it's a bit of a guess. But we do really rely, especially at Edinburgh, because of our competition levels, on those grade predictions, and we won't review an application without them. So it's very important that they're submitted on time and accurately reflecting, I suppose, the students' kind of capabilities.
So how do you judge that? Because so we talked about the personal statement and how they can play a role. Predicted grades are definitely at the heart of your selection process. But so how do you? I'm sure there's many high schools that you're very familiar with that send you students every year, and you kind of know where they come from. You know that you can trust the process. But how do you go about these students that would apply from a school where you've never had a students applying from, or once every whatever years, and maybe they don't have GCSE, so they don't have already exams kind of that they got prior. Like, how do you work with these students where you only have these predicted grades and they come from maybe a school that you don't have a record of?
Yeah, good question. So what we're looking for really was we'll look first at those predicted grades. So even if we're not familiar with the school, and odds are we probably are familiar with the school, but if we aren't, we would make sure that, I suppose the way it works is, so applications come in through UCAS, right? We have kind of a minimum threshold on our website, which states the minimum criteria for that program. We would look through the entire application pool. For everyone who meets that minimum requirement and exceeds it, we would pull them into what we call selection. Everyone else would be unsuccessful. Once we're in that selection pool, now let's say there's 100 applications and we have 50 spaces, we would pretty much rank them. So we would rank them from highest score down to lowest, and that would be highest in the French bac, highest in the IB, highest A levels down, and we would start to select that way. I know it sounds pretty crass, but this is kind of the way that we're ensuring a bit of academic quality, transparency. We have these kind of minimum criteria on the website, and then we sort of just base around that. And then again, when we get into those tie-break situations where we have 10 students, one space, all the same grade, that's when we start to look more holistically at that personal statement, at that reference. But initially,
you look at the reference as well?
We would look at the reference, yeah, again, generally in those more tie-break situations, but we would want to make sure, if anything was flagged, I suppose, in that kind of context section, about anyone who didn't meet kind of the subject requirements or those overall entry criteria, kind of would be flagged initially, perhaps as not being brought into selection. But really, those predicted grades are the biggest marker, and we're looking for that subject-specific requirement, that English requirement as well, if they're a non-English speaking national. So making sure they have that at GCSE or whatever they're kind of using for their English proficiency, and then that general overall entry criteria.
And so if you don't have GCSE or IB in English, let's say you come from the French back, would you say that an application is stronger if the student already has the IELTS score or the TOEFL score secure at the level that's expected, or a student that apply without that English language requirement test would be considered exactly the same? It would just have that condition added to the conditions on the offer you will receive?
Yeah, I think they would want to definitely see how the student was going to meet that English proficiency. But with a French back student, I believe we would accept, I can't remember this off the top of my head because it's really late in the day, so I'm just going to Google it really quickly. But I'm pretty sure that we would accept English.
Certain grades in the English.
Yeah. And so that would be fine. And so we would call that like pending, like they would be expected, and that would then form that condition. Unless if they did have, an IELTS, for example, they could also submit that. It is definitely beneficial to like submit everything that you have. And if they are planning to do that or to do an IELTS test, to then indicate in the application, IELTS test date, March 1st or whatever it is.
All right.
But I'm pretty sure we accept, yes, we do accept it, English language and lit.
So you don't have to do what's called, I don't know if you're familiar with the BFI, the new International French back. Doesn't have to be.
Yeah, so it can be either that one. Yeah. So the BFI, English language and lit at grade 12, or I can't say this is because it's in French, but the other one in the general French back, I can't say the word, it's in French, but that one at grade 14. So we would accept those in lieu of, a secure English language test. Yeah, absolutely.
Right. That's great. And so one more question on that, because I know when you compare A-levels, which is a system where students take only 3 subjects, sometimes 4 subjects, compared to a system like the French back where students have so many subjects and they can take extra options. So what would you say to a student that is meeting the requirement for whatever degree, like whatever course he wants to apply to at the University of Edinburgh? He has the right specialité, the specialties. And they're like, should I take an extra language? Should I take math, expert math? Should I take the BFI, that International French back? Would you say that in some part of the world, that can really help an application? Would you say in Scotland and at the University of Edinburgh, this is something that you would take into consideration? Or would you say it's better to just focus on the subjects that are required and do the best you can there? And having extra modules, extra courses around it is not something that would make a difference?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think I'm going to answer that in a few different ways. So I think we would certainly, the BFI is understandably a super rigorous qualification. So we would be very impressed for our students achieving really strong grades in that qualification. Obviously, we want to see kind of the strongest grades in those subject requirements. And if they are taking extra, that's great, but we want to make sure that it wasn't at the detriment of their kind of grades in those core subjects, and that they were performing well in those extra subjects, right? So I would say it's the same thing I would say with A-levels. Don't take a 4th A-level if it's going to knock down one of your other 3 A-level grades. Make sure it's boosting your profile. And in terms of what they might want to take extra, it really kind of depends on what they're applying for. So if they're applying for something like history, international relations, or politics, anything within the humanities that would kind of support that is a good choice. So that could be a language, it could be literature, it could be politics, anything that kind of, I guess, goes to show about that kind of breadth of knowledge that we were talking about earlier. If it's a STEM subject, again, it should be quite related to STEM. So maybe the other science that they're not taking or something. It shouldn't be random. It should be aligned to that kind of major or subject that they're applying for. And then it's worth kind of talking about this again in that personal statement, right? So showing that they intentionally took extra classes to demonstrate rigor, to demonstrate passion for a subject, motivation, etc., and to talk about that, and that they've done well in that. They've done more, classes than they needed to, and they excelled. And so that's something that we want to hear about, and we want them to be able to kind of reflect on that as well and point that out in that personal statement.
Yeah, I think that's something that's very important for students to wrap their heads around. I always have these discussions with students that, for example, are doing Latin, and then they get to Terminal, the grade 12, and they're like, oh, I can't do Latin with the math expert, but they want to do a very, quantitative math-based subject. And so I kind of encourage them to say, at this stage, getting to the last year in the UK, they've already made quite a drastic decision by only choosing 3 or 4 A levels. In the French bac, you already have that breadth with philosophy and lots of different subjects. If you're looking at a very quantitative subject, doing Latin or not is not going to really help your application, but doing the expert math might make a difference. So I would guess it's a good advice, right?
Yes, exactly what I would say. So yes, keep up with that.
Great. And so in our platform, we have students from grade 10 to grade 12. In some countries, that process of preparing to apply to university starts very early. I would say that the research process can start very early for any country, because it's good to get familiar with the university, understand how it works and what they're offering. But in terms of the preparation, would you say that there is anything that students should do in grade 10 and 11 that could increase the likelihood that they would get an offer afterwards, or is it just a process that happens in the final year?
Yeah, good question. I think certainly in year 10 and 11, they should be doing a lot of research. And I mean, research into the degrees that are out there, the universities that offer degrees in particular subjects, and really starting to understand what subject requirements there might be. Because as you say, in the UK, that kind of subject selection is done really early. The last thing you would want to do is kind of get to grade 12 and realize, oh shoot, I've not taken specialty maths and I need that to apply. And so by kind of doing that research earlier and having students become, I suppose, a bit more familiar with what these subject specific requirements are will help them, I hope, to narrow down those choice selections and make sure that they're not getting to a stage where they have to eliminate, a number of subjects that they're really passionate about. And I think, universities offer a lot of degrees that have the same name as well, and it can be quite confusing if you want to study something like history. How do you know which university to choose? And this is where it can take some time to kind of filter through university websites, but to see what research areas or institutes a particular institution offers in history. Edinburgh, we have an American History Center. We also have a Center for African Studies. We have a strong European history research centers. So depending on what area of history, they might find that one university program might be more suitable for them as well. But I think really that research can help them to kind of make their long lists quite early and to make sure they're on the right track subject-wise, because the last thing you want is for students to be completely eliminated from a degree program because they've not got the prerequisites. And it's heartbreaking when they come to you and it's too late.
So in terms of that research, can students come to campus and visit, the campus when they're in high school?
Yeah, absolutely. We have students visit all the time in Edinburgh. So students come with their high school. They can come independently with their families or on their own. We do campus tours every week. I think every week, Mondays and Fridays. But you can also kind of wander the campus on your own since it's right in the city center. But yes, absolutely. The earlier students can get an idea of where a university is based and see how they feel when they're on that campus. Is it a place that they think that they would thrive? I think that's a really good opportunity, especially if it helps them to kind of narrow down that list where they may apply to later on.
All right. Thank you so much, Ali. I think we had a good hours of chatting together. We covered a lot of topics. So thank you so much for being with us tonight. And I'm sure we'll talk again. Thank you for all the very, very helpful information that we can share now with our students.
Anytime. Thank you for having me. It was my pleasure. I could, as you can tell, probably go on and on, but thank you for bringing me in at 1 hour.
All right. That's great. All right. So see you on another episode of the Anywhere You Need Live podcast.